My name's Mike. I'm 38. Been a search and rescue volunteer for 16 years. I've seen every type of fool the Louisiana wilderness can chew up and spit out, sometimes intact, sometimes not. My then partner's name is Sarah. You'll hear plenty about her, because she was with me when this happened. She's the only person I've ever been able to talk with about it. Sarah's 26, sharp as a barbed hook, and still believes most people can be saved. I'm not telling this for the tourists or the true horror podcasts or the Reddit weirdos who think every southern cryptid is a meth head in a ghillie suit. If I'm being honest, I'm not even sure why I'm writing it down now, except that I'd like to be taken seriously for once, and maybe warn off the next idiot who thinks hiking the Kisatchie alone and unarmed is a good idea. Something is out there, something dangerous, and it almost tore us apart. Locals, deputies, and wildlife agents, they all have stories about what we encountered. They call it the Rougarou, but that's just shorthand for something alien to these woods. What I saw was a werewolf, if you want to be exact. If you want to be scientific, and I tried, you could argue it was an unknown species hiding in blind evolutionary cracks, a government project loose in the wild, or some mutation from years of chemical runoff. I hunted for any explanation that wasn't werewolf. None of them held up. You should know before we go any further. If you're looking for a tidy ending or a silver bullet, you won't get one here. But there are no lessons to be learned from this. The only thing I can offer is the truth as I remember it, and the warning that sometimes the stories the locals whisper over cheap beer at the bait shop are the only ones worth believing. It all started with a missing hiker deep in the forest. Our makeshift ranger station was little more than a cramped barn at the edge of town. It reeked of wet plywood, fuel, and bitter coffee. Sarah's name was already on the whiteboard. She sorted flares, calibrated her GPS, and Luna, the border collie, tracked each move. My own pack was kept together by duct tape and old prayers. Rex, my German shepherd, lay at my feet, his graying muzzle draped over my boot. We kept quiet, each running through our gear rituals. Sarah tallied water bottles, trauma kit, and our map, Northwest Quadrant circled in blue. That was her way of taming chaos. I had mine. Ready for today's contestant? Our search and rescue coordinator, Ray Johnson, burst in, eyes tired but uniform crisp, coffee cups in hand. He slapped a file on the table. Jason Mercer, 34, solo on a 3-day loop. Last cell ping Friday near the western ridgeline. Family says he was hiking a shortcut by Bayou Pierre. Alone? Sarah asked, scanning the file. Johnson nodded. Car is still at the trailhead. Itinerary in the dash. Got an inch of rain up there. Gullies washed out. Pig wallows everywhere. 2 teams on the east. You cover this gnarly northwestern section. He drew a line through dense woods and old burn scars. We both took a closer look at the map, then nodded in agreement. It all sounded easy enough. We loaded our gear and the dogs into my old pickup. The dogs knew the drill. They'd curl up together in the bed, despite their usual professional distance, conserving energy for what lay ahead. The drive to the trailhead took 25 minutes on back roads that became progressively worse. Sarah studied the topographic details we'd be walking into. Terrain looks challenging. These elevation changes, plus all these creeks and bayous, she tapped the blue veins that snaked between the contours. They'll be swollen from the rain. Probably why our guy got lost. Certainly picked a hell of a place to get creative with his route. I kept the radio tuned, listening to check-ins from the other teams already deployed to the eastern sectors, half hoping they might find him, saving us the trouble. 3 days overdue means he's either hurt badly or wandered way off course, I murmured. Either way, Rex and Luna will find him. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the dogs, who had indeed settled into their usual travel formation. Rex found that hypothermic kid last winter when he was 3 miles off his intended path. Dogs don't care much about rain or wrong turns. Sarah nodded, still studying the map. What's your gut telling you about this one? I considered the question as we bounced through another pothole. After 16 years of this work, you develop instincts that don't always make logical sense. Something about this search felt different, though I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. The terrain was challenging, but not impossible. Solo hikers often went missing. The timeline was concerning, but not unprecedented. Too early to say, I finally answered, though that wasn't entirely honest. There was something nagging at me, like a splinter I couldn't quite locate. We'll know more once we get the dogs on his trail. The trailhead parking area was nothing more than a small, gravelly clearing carved out of the forest, barely wide enough for 2 cars. Jason Mercer's Honda Civic sat alone under the pines, a thin layer of needles already settling on the windshield. I parked next to it and killed the engine. Rex jumped down, landing with the practiced ease of a dog who'd done this hundreds of times. Luna followed more carefully, her border collie brain already working as she scanned the tree line. I pulled Jason's jacket from the evidence bag Johnson had given us, a worn baseball cap that had been left behind on the unlocked Honda's passenger seat. Rex, here. I held the jacket out and watched my dog's nostrils flare as he processed the information. His whole body changed when he caught the scent. Ears forward, tail straight, every muscle coiled with purpose. Luna was doing the same dance with Sarah, her soft coat bristling slightly as she worked. Sarah shouldered her pack and checked her radio one more time. Base, this is Team Northwest. We're at the trailhead, beginning our sweep of the quadrant. The first thing I noticed when we entered the trail wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I've spent enough time in these woods to know that nature abhors a vacuum, and when everything goes quiet at once, there's usually a damn good reason. Rex worked the scent with his usual methodical precision, nose to the ground, following the trail Jason Mercer had taken days earlier. Luna flanked him, walking parallel to Rex's path, seemingly following the same scent. Sarah and I fell into our standard pattern, letting the dogs lead, staying close enough to give them enough room to move around if they needed to, eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. We walked in complete silence for about half an hour. The dogs were focused but relaxed, working their way through the forest with clear purpose. They had definitely picked up a scent. The terrain was getting more challenging. Lots of fallen logs and thick underbrush, but nothing we hadn't dealt with before. Despite the weird feeling earlier, I was starting to feel a bit more at ease. We'd probably find Jason with a broken ankle holed up somewhere in the forest, waiting for help. That's when Rex suddenly stopped dead, his head snapping up like he'd been struck. His ears went flat against his skull, and I watched his nostrils flare. Whatever he was smelling now wasn't the same tracking scent he'd been following. This was urgent, immediate, and it made every muscle in his body go rigid. "Rex found something," I called out to Sarah, watching my dog abandon the trail completely and veer hard to the right, toward a section of forest so dense with pine trees I could barely see 10 feet ahead between the trunks. Luna picked up on it a second later, her head jerking in the same direction. Both dogs started pulling against their leads. We followed them into the brush for another 50 yards or so. That's when the smell hit us, like a wave breaking against rock. First a hint, then suddenly everywhere. It was decay, yes, but not the simple rot of a dead animal. This was a complex symphony of putrefaction, the honeyed sweetness of meat several days gone, undercut by something musky and animal, yet not quite animal either. Something wrong. My throat closed involuntarily as saliva flooded my mouth, that body's betrayal that comes just before vomiting. I swallowed hard, tasting bile, while my brain scrambled to catalog what my nose was telling me. "Jesus Christ," Sarah muttered, pulling her shirt up over her nose. She kept moving, but slower now, eyes watering behind her sunglasses. I drew even with Rex and let him lead. The terrain dipped into a shallow depression, a bowl carved into the earth by runoff and the passage of time. The ground was slick with old needles and black mud. Rex suddenly stopped again. Then, out of nowhere, he started whining, a thin, high noise that didn't sound like him at all. He kept glancing back at me, then forward into the dense forest, then back at me again, like he couldn't decide which was worse, whatever was ahead, or retreating from his job. Luna actually tried to turn herself around, planting all 4 feet and digging in so hard that Sarah had to lean her whole weight on the leash to keep the dog from bolting. I've seen both dogs chase wild pigs, slither right up to sunning water moccasins, and take on a rabid raccoon without blinking. This was different. I knelt down, running my hand over Rex's shoulders. His fur rippled under my palm, muscles twitching. "Easy, boy," I said. And then to Sarah, "You ever see them act like this?" She shook her head, lips tight, and tried to soothe Luna, who responded by baring her teeth and whining louder. Whatever was in the depression was scaring the absolute shit out of both animals. "Maybe it's a bear carcass," I said. Sarah nodded. "Could be. It would explain the smell and the dog's fear. It could also be a live bear. The way they're acting, maybe it's denning up ahead." She glanced over her shoulder, back the way we'd come. "You want to call for help?" We didn't bring a rifle. I had a can of bear spray in my pack, so I wasn't particularly worried. "If it's a bear, we'll just yell at it and hit it with bear spray if push comes to shove," I said, pulling the can out of my pack. "Can only be a black bear. Usually they scare easily." Sarah still looked unconvinced, but eventually nodded. I kept the bear spray ready and choked up on Rex's lead, forcing him to move with me, though every inch of his body screamed to bolt. Sarah had her hand clenched tight on Luna's harness, dragging the dog along like it weighed twice as much as usual. The mud sucked at our boots with each step, and that sweet, sick stench crawled down the back of my throat until my eyes watered. We pushed forward, maybe another dozen yards, stepping over a fallen log slick with rot. The pines pressed in, branches clawing at our jackets. I tried not to think about how wrong this all felt. Sarah suddenly stopped short, hand out to halt me. "Mike, up there. Look." She pointed, voice hoarse. I followed her finger. At first, all I saw was needles and bark. Then the light shifted, and something blue, faded and torn, snagged high on a branch about 20 feet up, fluttered against the trunk. It looked like fabric. I moved closer, boots sinking into the muck, and craned my neck to get a better look. At first I thought, maybe he tried to climb, slipped, and somehow hurt himself in a way that made it impossible for him to climb down. I even called out, my voice sounding thin and small in the unnatural silence. "Jason? Jason Mercer? Search and rescue. Can you hear me?" No response. Just Rex's anxious panting and the wet sound of my boots shifting in the mud as I took another reluctant step forward. Then I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I had to squint to get a somewhat decent look, but there was no mistaking what I was looking at. Pieces of what had once been a human being. A blue jacket split open like a burst cocoon, revealing skin the color of wet cement, mottled with patches of green-black decay. Where the flesh remained, it hung in ragged strips, as though something with dull teeth had worried at it for hours. One leg was missing entirely from the hip down, the other bent backward at the knee, foot dangling by sinews. The arms were wrenched from their sockets and twisted into impossible geometries, bones jutting through skin like broken tent poles. The head lolled back at an angle only the dead can achieve, jaw unhinged and stretched wide as if a final scream had broken it. One eye socket empty, the other containing only a collapsed, gelatinous remnant. Dried blood had transformed the pine's bark into a grotesque canvas of rust-brown streaks that widened as they descended, pooling at the base in a blackened, cracked crust that had attracted a writhing mass of flies. For a long second, I just stood there, gripping the bear spray so hard I felt the plastic creak in my hand, my brain refusing to connect what I was seeing to anything I'd ever learned about nature. I tried to make sense of it. Animal attack, maybe, but no black bear or wildcat could haul a grown man 20 feet up, let alone tear him apart and then arrange him like that. Part of me wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, that maybe the shape in the branches was just a mess of torn clothes and trash caught in the storm, the way you sometimes see plastic bags snagged on telephone wires after a hurricane. But that wasn't plastic. That was flesh and bone. And nothing about the way those limbs bent or the sheer violence of it made sense. Sarah stumbled up beside me. She took one look, clapped a hand over her mouth, and doubled over, retching so hard I thought she'd fall. Her whole body shook with each heave, and tears ran down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dirt and sweat on her skin. Luna whined desperately, flattening herself into the mud like she was trying to disappear. Rex was silent, tail tucked so tight I could barely see it. I fumbled for the radio clipped to my vest, but when I brought it up to my mouth, my voice wouldn't come. My throat was raw, and for a second I just stood there, staring at the body in the tree, my thumb frozen on the transmit button. I was dimly aware of Sarah wiping her mouth on her sleeve, trying to pull herself together. "We have to get out of here," she whispered, voice ragged, eyes wide and unfocused. A branch snapped somewhere off to our left, not loud, just enough to cut through the thick air. Luna froze, neck stretched so tight it looked like something might snap inside her. Rex went rigid beside me, hackles fully up, and both dogs turned their heads immediately, in perfect unison, staring into the brush. Sarah's head also whipped toward the sound, lips parted, her whole body locked in place. I slid a step closer, feeling every inch of my skin crawl. Whatever was moving out there, it was big, much bigger than a squirrel or a raccoon. I squinted into the shadows, trying to pick out shapes in the drifts of pine needles and tangled brush. For a few seconds, all I heard was my own blood in my ears and Sarah's soft, panicked breathing. The undergrowth shifted again, slow, careful, but still failing to conceal the size of whatever was hiding there. I couldn't see anything, but I knew, as sure as I've ever known anything, that something was watching us. It hit me then how wrong it all was. I'd been so focused on the body in the tree, trying to file it into some category I could deal with, that I hadn't asked the most obvious question. Could whatever had done this still be close? The movement in the brush, the dogs going statue still, the silence pressing in from every side. My brain finally caught up to my gut. We needed to get out. Now. "We're leaving," I said, barely above a whisper, but firm enough that Sarah snapped out of it and met my eyes. She didn't argue. Her hand closed tighter on Luna's leash, knuckles white. I didn't look up at the torn-up body in the tree again. I didn't want to. My world shrank down to the feel of Rex trembling against my leg and the need to get moving, quietly, quickly, back toward the safety of the truck. Sarah nodded, expression pinched, and we started moving, retracing our steps as best we could in the gloom. We didn't run, but we didn't waste time either. We kept the dogs close, both of them moving in a low, anxious crouch, ears back and noses to the ground, just shy of a full-on panic. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something huge, crashing through the pines, but all I saw were the shifting shadows and that awful, unmoving silence. For maybe 3 minutes, we made steady progress. The air was still heavy with that sickly sweet rot, but it faded as we put distance between ourselves and the clearing. Sarah kept looking at her compass, jaw clenched, muttering under her breath as she tried to keep us headed in the right direction. The dogs were still nervous, tails tucked, eyes darting everywhere. Then, suddenly and without warning, both Rex and Luna stopped dead in their tracks. They turned as one, facing the direction we'd just come from. Hackles up, every muscle tight. Rex let out a low, threatening growl that vibrated up the leash and into my arm. Luna planted herself, legs locked, and stared into the trees like she could burn a hole right through the brush with her eyes. I tried giving Rex's leash a gentle tug. Nothing. He wasn't moving an inch. "Come on, boy," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, but it came out thin and shaking. Rex didn't budge. His lips had peeled back from his teeth, another low rumble vibrating through his chest. Sarah was doing the same with Luna, leaning her weight into the harness and hissing, "Luna, let's go. Come on, girl, please." But Luna might as well have been bolted to the ground. The dog's nails clawed at the mud, braced so hard her whole body shook. My heart was pounding in my ears. "They're not moving," I said, mostly to myself. Then the world snapped at us. The undergrowth exploded to our right. No warning, no buildup, just a wall of motion and noise. Something massive exploded from the brush. So fast, I didn't even have time to shout. 1 second, Rex was standing there, body taut with fear, and the next he was airborne, hauled off his feet by something that looked like a nightmare come to life. It wasn't a bear. Wasn't a wolf either. Not any kind they have in books or zoos. The thing was huge, bigger than any man, with a body that looked like it could tear through a steel door. Its fur was dark gray and slick with something else. Blood, mud, both, matted in patches that revealed raw, grayish skin beneath. The stench hit me like a physical blow. Rotting meat and something acrid, chemical, like battery acid mixed with the scent of a wet dog. Shoulders hunched. It stood upright, but not in any way that suggested a costume or some sick joke. Its legs bent in the wrong direction, jointed backward at the knee like a dog's hind legs, but ending in massive, human-like feet with blackened toenails. Its arms were too long, hanging past where knees should be, hands ending in black claws that were wrapped around Rex's body, holding him like a rag doll. The dog's legs kicked helplessly, a high-pitched whine escaping him that I'd never heard before, not in training, not in any search we'd ever done. A sound no dog should make. I'd like to say I caught every detail of the thing's face, but memory plays tricks, especially when your brain is trying not to break. The head, God, the head, hung low and massive, with a snout that looked ripped from a rabid timber wolf but stuffed awkwardly onto something that looked almost human. There was a sick logic to it. The flatness of the forehead, the heavy brow ridge, the way the ears curled back at the edges. The fur ran mottled up the sides of its muzzle, but the skin around its eyes was bare, mottled gray, stretched so tight it shone in the gloom like wet clay. Yellow eyes, pupils blown wide, with a rim of bloodshot red around each iris. Not animal eyes, nothing so simple. They were full of something close to awareness, anger maybe, or hunger sharpened by a kind of mean intelligence. The mouth opened and stayed open, jaws hinged so far that I thought for a second the whole lower half of the skull would split off. The teeth were obscene, not just sharp, but crooked, broken, some pointing sideways, stained the color of old cheese. At the back of the throat, I could see a black tongue, shredded at the edges like it had been gnawed in frustration. Thick saliva dripped from the gums as each breath came wet and ragged. I remember all that in one sickening instant, every detail burned into my brain, because that's all I could do, stare and try not to piss myself. Rex was whining, howling, twisting, trying to bite at the hand that held him, but the thing just squeezed. There was a pop, a tearing sound, and then another whine, more pain than panic. Rex kept struggling. The creature's eyes met mine, just for a second, just long enough for me to understand that it recognized us as prey, not a threat. It bared its teeth in what might have been a grin. Then, without warning, it jerked Rex higher, just a blur of muscle and fur and claws, and drove its jaws into the side of his neck. The sound it made wasn't like anything I've ever heard. A wet, ripping crunch, like snapping a bundle of thick celery underwater. Rex's body went limp, his legs dangling uselessly, the leash slipping from my trembling hand. Time shrank down to a pinpoint. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Sarah made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, but I couldn't look at her. I was frozen, just staring as the thing yanked a hunk of flesh free, teeth and gums slick and glistening. Rex didn't even twitch. 1 second, he was standing there, alive, my partner, and the next, gone, dead. It was like watching a switch get flipped. Then something inside me finally caught up. I raised the bear spray with a trembling hand and hit the trigger, a bright orange cloud erupting right into the creature's horrible face as it turned toward me. The creature screamed, a sound that was half roar, half human wail, and recoiled instantly, clawing at its eyes with its free hand. It staggered backward, retreating into the trees, but it didn't drop Rex's body, clutching him even as it vanished into the shadows. The creature gave us one last look over its shoulder, eyes catching mine, and then it forced itself into the trees, no longer concerned with stealth. Rex's mangled body dangled from its grip, the leash still attached to his collar. As the abomination disappeared behind a massive trunk, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the can of bear spray. I stared at it, useless, bright orange label smudged with sweat and dirt. My brain kept screaming at me to do something, run, fight, scream, but all I could do was stand there while my knees threatened to give out. I looked over at Sarah. She was crumpled on the ground next to Luna, her arms wrapped around the dog, rocking back and forth. Her face was buried in Luna's fur, shoulders heaving as she sobbed. The leash tangled around her wrist. Luna didn't move, didn't bark, just shivered quietly in Sarah's grip. "Sarah," I finally croaked. My voice sounded wrong, too thin. "Sarah, we have to move." Now she kept her eyes shut, hugging Luna tighter, but I grabbed her shoulder and squeezed hard enough to get through. "Sarah, get up." My hand was shaking so bad I could barely keep hold, but she felt it. Maybe the fear in my voice or the panic rolling off me, and she forced her eyes open. They were red and swollen, but focused enough to understand we had to get out, that there was nothing we could do for Rex. There were just the three of us left to save. We stumbled back the way we'd come. Luna seemed to snap back into herself first. She pressed close to Sarah's leg, then took the lead, nose low, body taut but determined. Sarah let the dog guide her, one hand clamped around the leash, the other pressed to her mouth to stifle the sobs. She didn't speak, just kept moving, tears streaming in silence. I trailed behind, bear spray still clenched, forcing myself not to break into a run and leave them both behind. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see that horrible thing loping after us. We broke into a run the second the trailhead came into view, the loose gravel skidding under our boots as we barreled through the last stand of pines. My lungs burned and every muscle felt ready to give out, but the thought of that thing moving silently behind us kept me upright. Sarah stumbled once, caught herself, and pushed on, Luna practically dragging her the last few yards. My truck sat there, paint dulled by a film of dust and pollen, nothing out of place. For the briefest second, the world almost looked normal again. I fumbled the keys from my pocket, hands slick with sweat, and yanked open the driver's door. Sarah came around the other side, scooping Luna up and half throwing her into the cab before climbing in herself. I slammed my own door. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I locked the doors first, heard all four click shut, and only then managed to turn the engine over. The truck coughed once, then started, rumbling loudly in the empty air. I slammed it into the reverse, tires spitting gravel, and didn't bother looking back as I spun the wheel, fishtailing onto the rutted track that led down the access road. We didn't say a word. I didn't think. Just drove and kept glancing at the rear view out of reflex, as if I actually expected to see that thing. God help me, that werewolf charging after us, long legs eating up the ground. A few times I thought I saw movement in the mirror, a flicker of gray between the pines, but it was probably just my nerves making shapes out of shadows. We hit the main road, finally, and only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding for what felt like an hour. My knuckles were still white on the steering wheel when it finally came out of me. "That was a goddamn werewolf," I said. The words sounded stupid even as I said them. Too big, too loaded, like I was reciting a line from some movie instead of talking about what just tore my dog apart right before my eyes. My throat hurt. I kept my eyes on the road, but the shape of it, the thing, kept flashing behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I heard Sarah suck in a shaky breath, but she didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead through the dirty windshield, her whole face wet and blotchy, arms locked around Luna, holding on so tight the dog let out a soft whine now and then, but didn't try to move. Sarah's chest hitched with each breath, but she didn't make a sound besides that. I kept talking anyway, as if I just laid out the facts. It might start to make sense. "Did you see its legs?" I said, voice too loud in the cab. "Bent backwards, like some kind of giant dog, but walking upright. And its face, I can't get it out of my head." I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles throbbing, as if maybe if I talked about it straight, it'd lose some of its power. It wasn't just an animal. That thing looked at me, right at me. Its mouth, did you see how wide it could open? Like it could unhinge its whole jaw. And those teeth, my voice trailed off. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I forced myself to picture it again. The muzzle was wrong, too long for a man, but set onto a face that had human cheekbones and brows, and its nose, a wolf's nose but flattened at the bridge, almost squashed in. Not one detail of that creature made sense. The small ranger station looked the same as always from the outside. Faded sign, yellow floodlight buzzing above the door. The supervisor's truck was parked half on the curb, but stepping into that worn linoleum felt like breaking the surface after nearly drowning. I half-carried Sarah up the steps. She moved with the stiffness of someone who'd just been punched in the gut and was waiting for a second hit. Luna slunk in behind us, head low, belly scraping the floor. Her tail curled so tight it brushed her chest. Ray Johnson sat behind his desk, halfway through a sandwich, radio clipped to one shoulder. He didn't look up right away. Back already? Did you? He stopped speaking as soon as he caught sight of us. His eyes ran from my face to Sarah's smeared cheeks, then down to Luna. He straightened, concern flickering across his face. I tried to line up the words in my head, force something that made sense out of what we'd just crawled through. Call the sheriff, I managed, voice raw and shaky. Now. Jason Mercer is dead. We found him. His body is... I stopped, couldn't finish it. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton. Johnson set his sandwich down slowly. Ray, listen, I'm not kidding. Jason Mercer's dead. Something tore him apart out there. Some kind of animal, I don't know what, but I had to stop, my voice catching on the word animal, like my brain knew it was the wrong one but couldn't find any other. It took Rex, too. I heard the edge in my own voice, the panic starting to crawl out. Ray's face had gone a shade paler, jaw working as he stared at me, waiting for the punchline that wasn't coming. What do you mean, animal? His eyes flicked past me to Sarah, who just shook her head minutely, eyes squeezed shut, still holding Luna like she was the last safe thing on Earth. I mean, it killed him, ripped him up, dragged him 20 feet up into a pine tree. I don't know what the hell it was, but we're lucky to be alive. My whole body shook. I could feel sweat cooling under my arms, my hands still sticky on the counter. Please call the sheriff now, then call everyone back. No one should be out there with this thing on the loose. He hesitated for half a second, eyes searching my face before picking up the phone. He watched me, then Sarah, then Luna, as if he could piece together the truth by seeing how broken we all were. Finally, he reached for the desk phone with fingers that trembled slightly. Sheriff, we found the missing hiker, he said, his voice pitched lower than usual. You need to come now. Bring backup. It's bad. He paused, eyes still on me. No, you'd better just get here. No, it's not a rescue mission anymore. It's a recovery. Ray finally set the phone down, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He didn't ask any more questions right away. Instead, he stood up, came around the desk, and put himself between us and the rest of the world, somehow making the little office feel less like a fishbowl. All right, both of you. Sit. Sheriff's on his way. He'll bring a few deputies. I'll handle the radio and make sure nobody else goes out until we know more. He kept his eyes on mine, steady, not letting them wander to Sarah's tears or the blood on my sleeve from where Rex's leash had snapped back against my arm. You're safe here. Take a second. Just breathe. The sheriff walked into the station 10 minutes later like a man who'd already decided he wasn't going to be surprised by anything we had to say. He nodded to Ray, gave Sarah and me a careful once-over, then sat with a slow grunt in the folding chair across from us. We told him everything, or I guess we tried. Our words tripped out in bursts, what we saw in the trees, the way the dogs had acted, Rex's death, the thing's face, the posture, how it killed and carried off the large dog like it was nothing. I kept waiting for the disbelief, the ridicule, the gentle suggestion that maybe we were in shock or just couldn't accept a bear attack. But Sheriff Henderson just listened, elbows on his knees, lips pressed thin. Sarah's voice broke a few times. She left out only the worst of her crying, but otherwise laid it all out. Neither of us sugarcoated it. When we finally ran out of words, the station was so quiet I could again hear that old Coke machine humming by the back door. The sheriff just leaned back and looked at the floor. He didn't ask us to repeat anything. He didn't ask about drugs or exhaustion or try to poke holes. He just sighed, deep and tired, like someone who'd carried a secret too long and knew it was about to get heavier. He muttered, "Rougarou," under his breath, the word coming out soft and muddy, not for us, but for himself. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Then he looked at us, eyes hard and flat. "You know the stories?" he asked, not really waiting for an answer. "Cajun legend. Werewolf haunts these woods. Old folks say if you lock eyes with it, you'll be cursed. That's how they keep kids close to home after dark." He paused, studied my face for any disbelief. "Most folks don't take that stuff seriously. Most never saw what you saw." I wanted to argue, to get angry, demand that he do something, but my voice felt caught in my throat. "We need to take a team out there," I managed. "You can't let that thing roam free. If there's something like that out there, we have to find it and kill it," I said, sharper than I meant to. "Hell, get every deputy you've got. Get the wildlife and fisheries boys. Call the feds, I don't care. You have to do something. It's not going to stop with Jason or Rex." I kept thinking about the mess it had made out there. "It's a killer, Sheriff. We need to put it down, no matter the cost." He shook his head, slow and deliberate, like he'd already run through every argument in his mind and locked it in place. "No hunting party. No one's going back in there tonight, tomorrow, or next week. Not me, not my men, not you. I'm sorry for your dog, Mike, and I'm sorry for Jason, but going after that thing would be suicide." His voice was stone, but there was a flicker of something else. Fear, maybe, or memory. "You think you're the first to see it? You're not. I've had calls like this before. A couple of weeks back we had a call. 2 out-of-towners, a young couple. They slid off the road during that big thunderstorm, the one that washed out half the low-water crossings. They managed to call for help, but we were busy that night. The Rougarou came for them, clawed the van and tried to get in. Took off when the fire trucks showed up. They had no idea how lucky they were. If we go after it, it'll pick us off one by one." He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window, as if seeing the tree line in his mind. Then he added, almost to himself, that over a decade earlier, his predecessor had tried exactly that. Went in after the thing with 3 local hunters, 4 men in all. Only one came back out. He said the thing ambushed them several times in broad daylight, using the terrain, like it knew where they'd be before they even got there. It toyed with them, drove them apart. By sunset, the others were gone. Nothing left but blood and torn canvas. The sheriff stopped talking, staring down at his hands. He muttered something about how the creature thought in patterns, about how it used strategy like a man. Then, with a hollow laugh, he said the feds had shipped his old boss off to a psych ward in Baton Rouge not long after. Said the man never recovered from what he saw. I wanted to scream at him, demand he do his damn job, and protect the people who trusted him. But something in the way the sheriff's hands trembled ever so slightly kept my mouth shut. I had seen that thing up close, and I couldn't really blame him for not wanting to go looking for it out there in the woods. And he was probably right in his assessment. It would be a bloodbath, and that thing was probably smart enough to walk away unscathed. The sheriff spoke up again. "Listen to me," he said, voice low but steady. "We file the report as a bear attack. Nothing more. No details, and certainly none of that folklore crap. We close off that section of forest. We put up warning signs. That's all." He waited for that to land. Let the silence stretch between us. "You want to save lives? Tell everyone you know not to go near those woods. That thing's been out there for decades. It moves on eventually. Always does." Surprisingly, Ray Johnson agreed with him. Maybe he'd had his own run-in with that thing, but I couldn't say for sure. Either way, we had no choice but to comply with the sheriff's order. There was no official investigation, no follow-up, no public record of what really happened. After the incident, Sarah and I both quit the search and rescue team. She moved to California first and took a job as a paramedic in Los Angeles. A few weeks later, I followed, eventually joining the LAPD. We still talk sometimes. We're friends, bound by something no one else could ever understand. Neither of us goes into the woods anymore.